Hello everyone, it's Daniel. I know you're used to hearing Brian start the show, but I'm stepping in today to get things started. You're listening to My Pop 5, a pop culture podcast about people. In our show, we bring on guests to break down 5 pieces of pop culture that had an influence on them or helped shape them to become the people that they are today. Today, Ryan and I interview a good friend of ours, Dom Sean. He is a phenomenal music producer, and you'll hear some of his tunes sprinkled throughout the show, including the intro. Here's our conversation with Dom Sean.
See, I just want to be better, improving shit. But I want to be the king, I'm on my ruler shit. But the weight of the crown weighs me down, now my head is so heavy. Breaking out in tears like I'm tearing down both.
Hello everyone, we are here with Dom Sean, incredible music producer, long friend of mine from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thanks so much for joining us, Dom.
Dude, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We've had the pleasure of kind of just experiencing all that LA has to offer this weekend and spending some time together, but it's been a long time coming of wanting to have you join the show and talk about all the things that you love and the things that have inspired you to, further your career in the music industry. And it's been so fun to watch you both from the start of your career, because you kind of restarted getting back in the music industry shortly after I met you. And so seeing that to where you are today, it's been cool, inspiring, and really just altogether awesome to see it happen.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I remember that. So much. Whenever we met, so much of my life was going on in that short span of time.
Yeah, a lot of change, but we'll get into that. I do want to kind of hear some of those stories, but before we do, what I'd like to ask all our guests is, can you, without any comment or context, list what your pop 5 is?
Yeah, no particular order, no context. I have Anthony Bourdain. I've got OVO, which, like, more specifically, I'm being a music producer. I'm more interested in like Noah Shabib and Boy Wonder and stuff like that. I have Rise Against, Appeal to Reason album, Rick Rubin, and Guitar Hero.
Guitar Hero, man, that's the truth. I'm kind of interested in having some cursory knowledge of you and your background. I can kind of already put some pieces together in terms of how some of these inspired you, but there's also some that I'm like, okay, I'm interested to kind of see where this goes. So
yeah, for sure.
Let's kind of get into it. Can you tell me a bit about kind of where you grew up and kind of what got you interested in music in the first place?
I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm from Farmington, small town north of there. But no, I've been interested in music ever since I can remember. My mom, she used to always play these old 80s records. She was really into like Def Leppard and Guns N' Roses. So I was put onto that game like really early, like as a child. I don't know, especially like Guns N' Roses, just the way that all of it sounded, because that, like, it's so crazy hearing it 20, 30 years after. It was that kind of started it all for me, was listening to the radio with my mom. And I remember when I was a kid, I got this Backstreet Boys like
Let's
VHS, and it was this like this live show that they did somewhere. They played in front of so many people, and I remember like they were doing the dances, they were singing, and I was like, no, I want to be that. I would dance. I was a little kid, and I would do all the dances. I would sing the songs. No, I was into it for sure.
Wow. And so did you immediately start playing an instrument, or did you get involved in any sort of musical activities, or when did that develop into something that seemed realistic?
Yeah, no. So not until a lot later, like end of middle school days, high school days, is when I would say, actually, you know what? Probably, I remember I used to write like lyrics all the time when I was like in 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade, beginning of high school. I started trying to write songs and put guitar to it. I've been playing guitar since I was, I want to say 13. 13 sounds reasonable. 14 maybe. No, 13, because it was middle school. I had a little electric Fender when I knew nothing about guitar. This was before the days where you could like Google how to become a guitar god in like a week, so
right.
I remember I used to, when I was in high school, days where I wouldn't see my friends, or I didn't have like sports because of where my high school was. It was a couple miles from a guitar center. And so every time, and it became like in my sophomore year of high school, it was almost like every day I would walk down to the guitar center
Wow.
And I would like read the tab books and read the chord books and pick up their guitars, use their amps, and just play guitar until my mom was off work at like 5. I'd get off of school at like 2. It would take me like 30 minutes to walk there.
Yeah.
And then I would hammer away on guitars for a couple hours.
That's so amazing, man. And would you say you got pretty good doing that, or was it relatively average, or what would
I mean,
you say?
at that point, I had already been playing guitar for a couple years. I had played bass. So I kind of honed the little skills that I had at like the Guitar Center,
Sure.
Playing alone at home. So I would say that it helped. Yeah, I learned a lot walking there and playing and seeing the same people every day. And yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. And did you ever like venture out into being in any bands, or was it always just kind of solo?
No. So when I when I was like, I want to say a freshman in high school, there was a time where I was really into like rock and metal and all these different like screamo and hardcore bands that were coming out. And so I had friends, that I was going to school with that were into the same stuff. And we would get together after school. And that's when I like started taking music semi-seriously, I guess. Like I wanted to be a part of it. Something about it just always felt intriguing. I wanted to be involved. I always wanted to be in a band, playing Warped Tour, doing the whole thing. But so yeah, that's when I started like playing bass, because they already had 2 guitar players, and they were like, well, here, nobody else wants to be the bass player. So that's how I started all of it.
Yeah, that's crazy. Do you remember any like specific songs? Was it all covers, or was it original music with that group at that time?
So we would write our own tunes, but we also, I remember we would try to cover like Avenged Sevenfold songs. Bullet for My Valentine was really popular at that time. So I mean, the guitar players were way more talented than I would have ever been, because they were like playing jazz band in high school and everything. So they were already miles ahead of where I was, having never picked up a guitar before.
So let's get into it. You've mentioned guitar in itself and Avenged Sevenfold, and like what those are bringing back to me in terms of relation back to your list is Guitar Hero, right?
Yeah.
I remember when I was playing Guitar Hero, one of my favorite songs was an Avenged Sevenfold song in Backcountry.
Yeah.
And I remember playing it all the time in Guitar Hero. So talk to me.
Good.
Tell me about your experience with Guitar Hero, and why do you think it was so impactful for you?
Man, I couldn't tell you what year any of those video games came out. I remember it was like early 2000s, because I was like a kid. And ever since I was really young, I've always played video games. My stepdad had like an NES and an SNES, and I remember he would let me play. I'd play games like Contra and like Street Fighter and all that fun stuff. And so I've always, and still to this day, I play video games, all the time. It's my thing. But when Guitar Hero came out, it kind of like changed the game, at least for a lot, like me and all my friends I had at the time that really liked music. It allowed us the opportunity to kind of combine 2 of our loves. Yeah, dude, I remember we used to play the hell out of that thing. You'd have like 2 guitars with your homies, and then when they did Rock Band and they added the drums and the singing, I spent hours upon hours upon hours upon hours.
I remember when the first Guitar Hero that came out, it didn't really have much notoriety. I think like it did come out for the PS2, and I think there were just still some kinks that they needed to work out. But by the time Guitar Hero 2 rolled around, which was around 2006-ish, they had a huge groundbreaking moment where kind of everyone was playing it. I think some of it was also just like when they improved the game mechanics. A lot of the songs I think were like super impactful. But then lastly, I think there's something about like the design being that like looking like that Gibson SG type of guitar.
Yeah, the guitar controller, bro.
Yeah.
You'd have all kinds of different ones.
And they give you like stickers and decals and stuff that you could put. And I remember one of my favorite parts about that game is the ability to just name your band. And like you start off being a shitty band in little venues, playing the first few songs, and as you advance through the game, your band then gets bigger and bigger, and by the end you're playing like stadium shows, like if you're playing through all the songs. And so it was like so crazy because it went enormous. It was one of the best selling video games of 2006. And then on top of that, like Walmarts and GameStops everywhere started hosting like Guitar Hero tournaments and stuff like that, at least where I grew up. So do you remember participating in any of those, or was it mostly just you and your homies?
Nah, dude. So, I mean, when it comes to like social stuff like that, like big people gatherings.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not really my thing.
Yeah.
You know, I like small group stuff, just
Yeah.
the homies. That's how I've always kind of been.
Yeah, what another really cool thing is, as kind of Guitar Hero developed and Guitar Hero 2 passed on and Guitar Hero 3 came out, they then like gave you the option to like, because I think the second one was so huge, they then got like deals done with like Tom Morello and Slash
Right.
to have their
The famous
likenesses
guys
in the
were in
game.
there.
And then you could play as Slash or play as Tom Morello, and it was just like, Guitar Hero was like the biggest thing at that time, and it just was truly crazy. Do you remember a favorite song or songs that you played on the game?
So many. I found so many cool bands and listened to so many great, because they had a lot of like classic rock on there.
Right.
You know, they had like Band on the Run would be on there. It'd be insane. And then you'd have like Kansas with Carry On Wayward Son.
Yes.
You'd be belting it. And then I don't know if it was Guitar Hero 2 or 3, the one that had that Dragon Force song at the end.
That was Guitar Hero 3. And
Through the Fire and the Flames.
yeah, I remember when Guitar Hero 3 came out, because you mentioned in Guitar Hero 2, you start out as this very, very small band, and then that's kind of the progression of the game, is you going through and making it to bigger and bigger events, and which I think is funny because it's similar to other games that were popular at the time, like Tony Hawk. Where
Right.
that was kind of the premise, was you start out as this neighborhood skateboarder who kind of ends up in the world of professional skating. And then with Guitar Hero 3 specifically, that was the first one where I think they really went like over the top, because in Guitar Hero 2, actually, the very last stage you play at Stonehenge.
Don't you play against like the devil, bro?
You play it, yeah, he's against the Grim Reaper. And then Guitar Hero 3, you do battle the devil, because
Right.
the last song you play before.
Isn't it
Well,
like Devil Went Down to Georgia?
Yeah,
I'm
Devil Went Down to
remembering it
Georgia.
now.
And I remember there was a specific version that they remade, or Guitar Hero 3 made their own version of Devil Went Down to Georgia.
Wow.
And then so you battle the devil as like the final boss.
Yeah.
And then after that, because you beat the devil, you're on top of this mountain playing Through the Fire and Flames.
Right.
And it's like,
That's so sick.
yeah, this moment where they just went like, boom, we're going crazy.
Yeah.
And we're just going to make it like this really surreal moment, you know, where
I
you're
think
the
it-
guitar god. I think because it was like Legends of Rock, and then the end of the game,
Yeah.
you become this legend because you beat the devil. So
Dude, it's so sick.
it is. It is funny how they over time went further and further with it, and
Right.
just kind of pushed that idea further into where I think it got a little bit more video gamey in that way.
Yeah.
Well, there truly was an eventual battle between Guitar Hero, which started off this whole concept, and Guitar Hero 2 and 3, like Guitar Hero is running the world.
Yeah.
And then Rock Band came out, and Guitar
Right.
Hero was like, shit, we need to change course because people are liking the fact that you can sing
Yeah.
and that you could play drums.
They eventually added their own, I think.
They did, and it became like Guitar Hero World Tour. And then, like, eventually I think it just fell off like most things do, where, you know,
Right.
people are moving on and interested in different things.
Right.
But yeah, I still think back to that. My first experience was with Guitar Hero 2, and just some of those songs, you know, at the start of the game, whether it's like Surrender by Cheap Trick, or I was like a huge Rush fan. And so like when I unlocked the next song and it happened to be YYZ by Rush, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the sickest thing.
Right.
All with like the ending of like Freebird. I think like everyone was just playing Freebird all the time because
Right.
it was the last song and like the hardest song, you know, or whatever on the game for Guitar Hero 2. So ultimately it was so crazy. And there is a small little anecdote I want to get to regarding Daniel. And one of my favorite songs ever, and it's on Guitar Hero 3, I believe, is Dead by My Chemical Romance.
Oh, bro.
And the other, a few years ago, Daniel posted himself playing Dead on Twitter, but on a real guitar, and fucking killed that solo. And I was just like, dang, man. So I was just trying to master it on Guitar Hero.
I haven't seen that video. I love My Chemical Romance.
I'll show it to you. It's still on my Twitter.
I'm gonna have to geek out over that, bro. I kid you not. A little story. When I was freshman year of high school, that's when the Danger Days record came out,
Mhm.
and I kid you not. As brown as I am, I dyed my hair like bright red. Like I wanted to
Oh,
be
it's-
Gerard Way, bro. I wanted to be in that band so bad.
Oh, I feel the same way. I remember during like the Black Parade era where he was rocking the silver hair. Like I wanted to do it so
Dude,
bad.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's iconic.
What are some songs, like if you can remember, what are some songs that heard through Guitar Hero that ended up becoming like some of your favorite music?
Like I said, I geeked out really hard on Dragon Force after Through the Fire and Flames, just because, like I said, I'm a guitar geek. So like any dudes that could just shred, you know, or any of the blues guys or any of the fast playing metal guys got me really hyped. And so that's like Guitar Hero helped propel me into seeing all these different guitar acts. And then that's when like YouTube got really big. So I would start YouTubing like, oh, who's the best guitar players? You know, let me listen to these guitar solos. And a lot of like my early YouTube was just listening to all these guys play guitar solo mashups. It was one of my first introductions to like the Eagles with Hotel California, I think was on there.
Yeah.
And it really like, I think it was Guitar Hero 2 really helped push my love for like 70s music. Dude, I'd have to see the track list. Yeah. And then I'd probably be like, oh yeah, this is why I like this. And because I consume so much different music, you know, like one day it's pop music, the next it's EDM, the next day it's rap cuts, and then I'm listening to Dragon Force one day, you know, so stuff like that, random shit. But it definitely impacted like the type of music that I wanted to listen to, like more technical stuff with guitars and yeah.
I remember that was the first place I heard Avenged Sevenfold, and on Guitar Hero 2 it was
Beast and the
Harlot.
So good.
Probably like when I think of like, oh, what bands had I not heard of until Guitar Hero, it was Avenged Sevenfold, and then for years after that, you know, I mean, it's still one of my favorite like modern metal hard rock bands for sure.
Yeah, no, I was a big Avenged Sevenfold fan at that time. I was listening to every record every day, wanted to be Sinister Gates, like that. He's one of the coolest dudes. Yeah, no, the Avenged Sevenfold played a big role when I was growing up for sure.
There's like two things I think with Guitar Hero in general that I think are kind of what led to some of the decline. And the first was a lot of what makes you a skilled Guitar Hero player at the onset is if you just have really good hand-eye coordination, right? So you see the color coming and you knock it down. However, there's a point when you get to like hard and expert mode where like at the end of the day, the only way you're going to be able to kill those songs is if you go to their like practice mode, play them slower, and it's basically like practicing an instrument where you memorize what the patterns are, so that way when you're playing the game live you play it through. And then at that point is when I kind of realized, because I was also learning drums and like learning how to be a musician at the moment, where I'm like, I'm spending more time on this Guitar Hero shit when I could be doing the same thing practicing a real fucking instrument. And like, so I was like, there's a level where like you can get through and just have fun and it's something different. But at a certain level, if you're beating expert mode, it's because you sat there playing it at 50% speed, memorizing all the patterns. So that way when they came up at full speed, you knew exactly what they were. So like there's that, which I think eventually like led to a lack of interest of you can only hit a certain point without actually having to practice the game.
Right.
And then secondarily, they started doing dumb shit like adding like DJ Hero and stuff like that, where you could like spin records and do stuff like that. But ultimately, I think most people just grew out of it. It was such a cool concept and so innovative. Right. And I remember at like, I say parties in air quotes in high school, because I didn't drink or anything in high school and none of my friends did. Right. And so our parties were going to each other's houses and playing Guitar Hero and Rock Band and this type of stuff. And so I think really fondly of these games and that time, and it was so much fun. And I'm somewhat nostalgic for it as we talk about it now. But yeah, eventually, you know, it kind of got old and we all kind of moved on to the next thing.
Yeah, I forgot where it was. Can't say a couple. It was probably, I think I played it again, I want to say like 6 or 7 years ago. Somebody had like Guitar Hero. I think it was like World Tour.
I tried hooking it up. I have a PlayStation 2 here.
Oh, wow.
And I tried hooking it up to play it just like for nostalgia's sake. But like all televisions now are like too good for them. So like Guitar Hero 3, well, one, it looks terrible and it doesn't sync. Now, Guitar Hero 3, you could calibrate your TV to where like you could calibrate so that way it like syncs up. But Guitar Hero 2 was so old, like TVs didn't even have those capabilities or the HD capabilities. So they just worked. And like you can't calibrate it the same way as you can on some of the newer versions of the game. So basically, the game is obsolete for me now, unless I were to play it with like a controller.
Right.
I think.
Yeah,
But
You know, when you said that it got to a point where you really had to like practice the songs, it reminded me of, you're right that Guitar Hero 2 came out and was this huge phenomenon in a way that it wasn't, you know, when Guitar Hero 1 came out. And so by the time Guitar Hero 3 was rolling around, like everybody had enjoyed Guitar Hero 2. It was on PS2 and then also on Xbox 360 for the first time. So everyone was playing it. And I remember it was big because I lived in a small town and Guitar Hero 3 was available as a demo at GameStop. So people were lining up at the mall to play the demo of Guitar Hero 3. And there was this one dude that was hogging the fucking controller. And he was just like the most typical
dickhead.
Dude, but he was like this guy, like very nerdy, like long, huge ponytail.
Wow.
And like on top of all of that, like he was hogging the controller and he took it so seriously that he had his own guitar pick that he brought to play the game with. Yes.
Oh my
bro,
days.
you don't need a pick for that. My gosh.
Nah, I never took it that serious.
Oh man, and it was just it was funny. I'll never forget it because he was just standing there probably playing for like an hour, and then he'd like let someone like play a song and then he'd just like jump right back on it.
What a dick.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Nah, I'd have said something. I can't.
So Dom, we've kind of already learned you were really enjoying playing the guitar. Guitar Hero was big and you were kind of hearing a lot of new influence in terms of rock music and rock and roll and kind of that influence. And at that time, around, you know, this 2006 to 2008 era, you have another album on here from that time, which is Rise Against Appeal to Reason album. So how did you come across that record and why would you say it was impactful for you and your career thus far? We'll get back to the show in just a moment. No, this isn't an ad read, but we do have a couple things that we'd love to share. I've been getting quite a few questions about how you can support the show. The truth is you're already doing it by listening, but if you're looking to do a little bit more, the best way is to support our show is to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Rating and reviewing truly does make all the difference for podcasts. So leave us a review, and in that review, tell us what your Pop 5 is, and we'll read it on the show. Another way to help us out is just following us on Instagram at MyPop5. We post short recaps of the show and include video or music clips that are referenced in the episode. They're some of our favorite pieces of content to produce. Anyway, thank you again for listening, and we'll get back to the show.
Appeal to Reason came out in 2008. I think that was an election year. That was like the first year that I think Obama was being elected. Mm-hmm. And I had already listened to the record they put out before that, The Sufferer and the Witness. I had that on CD. And then at that same time, I think that's when, what's it called? Pandora was doing like the radio thing. So they'd shuffle through all kinds of different acts. So I had like Rise Against radio because I had enjoyed some songs off Sufferer and the Witness. I think they had some songs in some video games. I think they had like a song in a Madden prior to that. And so I was kind of like hyped, you know, when they dropped that new project, and that record at the time, it just completely like blew me away just because the production value on that record is, I think for the time that it was at and the way their music is, you know, how like aggressive it can get for it to sound that good. You know, I was blown away. And then it was at that time where I was, you know, at a more impressionable age, I guess. I was kind of hitting my teens. With Rise Against, with the way they perform, the way their music is you know, you can hear the lyrics clearly, so you can understand everything he's saying. Yeah. As opposed to like some of the metal at the time that I might have listened to, where it's just this guy screaming along to some riffs, and you're like, it sounds cool, I don't really know all of it. With the Rise Against record, now you hear every word, and it was the first album where I really paid attention, kind of to like what they were saying. Yeah. And that's from capitalism, saving the environment, equal rights, stuff like that. They have a song on there called Hero of War, and that talks about what was going on in the Middle East. And at that time, you know, when you're a preteen kid, you're like, well, what is the Middle East? What are we doing over there? What's going on? You know, and just the type of person that I am, you know, I question every piece of information I get until I understand it, you know, to the best of my ability. And so they turned me on to all of these issues, you know, because they were singing about all these different things. And so that's kind of what opened my eyes to like the political situation in the United States. And
Sure.
no, man, that record changed everything for me.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is everything that you touched on is, kind of what some of my takeaways were. I had never listened to the record as a whole until you put it on this list. Now, I had heard Savior before, right? And
Right.
that's such a smash on this record. Like,
Yeah,
it's
no,
like,
that charted really, really well. at
yeah,
the
and
time.
I went into this knowing Savior, and I was just kind of like, I want to go this with open ears, and really just take this in fully and have a opinion after I've listened to all of it. And I kind of want it to be like, I want to find what the best song is with no influence, knowing Savior. And then even after listening through, I'm like, but Savior hits though, like it's so good.
It's like that commercially song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it feels like the songs of that time, like, and I think even Daniel alluded to it, that would feel like it should belong in a Tony Hawk game or in Madden or in any of those games at the time where you're just like, this has to live there. And where we grew up in Albuquerque, like it is like the pinnacle of a song that would be on the edge, or like,
Right.
the music
radio.
in the radio in our time. Now, what I thought was interesting is I was familiar with Rise Against, but I think it might have been from more of their like true punk rock stuff in the records before, and this one was like the first record that gave it more of a accessible sound and was like clear and had
Right.
really solid production value. And so it was, when I was listening to it, I was like, this sounds like something I have heard before, but I think it was mainly just because so many people and bands at that time were kind of taking to that, let's bring what eventually became pop punk, but before it was truly pop punk, let's take these traditionally gritty sounds and put them through clean production and high quality production to create what we now all know is like a traditional pop punk, Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Discount, My Chemical Romance type of production value. But I think with some of the similar messaging that you would have heard historically from a punk rock band, right? In terms of the stuff you talked about, whether it was influence of political content or any of those things, really great. And I think it was a pleasant surprise kind of going back and listening to this record and hearing all of those things like you mentioned.
Yeah. So a lot of the songs, the stuff they were singing about, because like you said, the records before, like The Sufferer and The Witness and the Siren Song of the Counterculture, the record that's got like Give It All and Paper Wings and all that. No, you're right. They had, grungier is not the right word, but the production quality wasn't there. They still sounded like some band that would play like smaller venues, and they were just screaming, and it was still really great. I love those songs, but yeah, you're right with the Appeal to Reason record. That's when the main, like the pop hooks kind of met the punk rock, and in that space, and to still be doing it today, they pivoted in a direction that put them, where they're at today.
Yeah. Another song that I think kind of was really interesting to me, because most of them, and sorry, this isn't a diss on them, but followed a similar structure, right? I think like the sounds you're hearing from track to track, and this was consistent with music at that time, was let's put 12 tracks together that really complement each other. Whereas I think the album ended up shaping later to be more of, let's see some variants, almost like a playlist you would have today. You're not going to have a playlist that's like 12 songs that sound the same. You're going to have some ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
And this song has some of that. Like Hero of War is very different from songs like Savior and stuff like that. But sonically, I think especially alternative rock music of this time was very flat in the sense of we're rocking in your fucking face the whole thing.
Yeah.
And there isn't a lot of ebbs and flows. Now, I say that to say there are a couple songs which kind of break that mold. And one of them for me was Entertainment. And
So good.
Entertainment has like those moments where it kind of breaks into almost like a stage show, like I'm at the circus.
Right. It's got that bass in there that's real 60s circus style entertainment. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt that way. And on top of that, they're like also talking about like what media and content does to like manipulate viewpoints and stuff like that. And so I was kind of really taken away at that moment because it was like very loopy in terms of everything else I had been listening to on this record, and gets to that moment.
Right.
And really just powerful ultimately.
And here I was like 14 years old, 15 years old listening to that. and they're, they're telling me, hey, these people, the news that you're watching is like not what's going on. They're pushing an agenda, and a lot of that is like still values, and how I see a lot of the world today is because of like that band.
But it's also meta in the sense that your viewpoint was shaped on them.
Right.
So another piece of media that's shaping your viewpoints,
Yeah, no, it's all connected, bro.
It's like, don't listen to anything, but listen to us telling you not to listen to anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. What are some of your favorite songs on the record?
My all-time favorite song, like all time, still to this day, is Audience of One. I think it's like track 8.
Yeah.
At the time, and music is like open to interpretation for a lot of the times, unless it's a real like direct thing. And I think the thing with that song is it's general enough, in terms of like a song today, like when Drake's going to do a song and he's just talking about all this general stuff and everybody's like, oh, this is dope, because it's relatable. That was kind of like how general that song was for me at the time. And so I would relate it to, I'd relate the lyrics to whatever was going on in my life, at the time with all these different things. I like Long Forgotten Sons, track 2, because of mainly the ending, but I love the hook and the bass line in that. It was incredible. Entertainment's really good, like you said. I like Whereabouts Unknown, Hairline Fracture, like the back of the record that doesn't get enough play.
It's because after people hit Savior, man, they're like, that was it, man.
They're like, that's it. It's not going to get any better. No, it's facts.
I really like The Dirt Whispered.
Really?
Yeah, that tune, and then again, you and I actually were listening to it in the car today. And that song came on, and like I had to like double take and be like, which one is this again? And I didn't want to talk about it at the moment because, we were saving it for this conversation here. But that song, I think, was one that I think ventured away from musically from what I think the rest of the record sounds like.
It's different, huh?
Yeah, but I really did like that song as well.
Yeah. And I always like something that record showed me that I kind of carry, I guess nowadays professionally, when I sit down with a record is, okay, how good can you make this? Like if it's going to be a project, like an album like that, I still kind of tend to hold on to those values of it should be 12 songs that complement each other or tell one big story or similar stories. Or in Rise Against case at the time, and what I like now is on songs like The Dirt Whispered, and then you go to Hero of War, and then Savior, or Re-Education, their other big radio hit, and it shows you like how versatile they can be within their, respective sound. Yeah. And so like when an artist does, like if I'm going to listen to a track or an album today, whether it's like a trap album or a pop album, if you have 12 songs, like you said, that all sound the same, I'm kind of like, all right,
It's interesting though, because I do think that from a record label's perspective, there is an incentive at that time to basically say, hey, look, we have a formula for what we think is going to be a hit in some capacity. And so if we have 12 songs that have this, they're all just lottery tickets hoping to achieve the same thing. Right. And I think we saw that with like early pop records too, where I think like if you go back and look at like a Chris Brown record or something around that same time, they would have 18 songs that were all the same fucking song, but just, yo, excuse me, miss is the one that popped off. Or, those other types of, R&B records, Neo at the time, who I loved. And I had like so many of his songs that blew up, but he had 12 So Sicks. It was just So Sick is the one that popped off. That's the one that resonated with most people. And on the other side of things too, the Kelly Clarksons, the Carrie Underwoods, like they would just be like, let's throw as many darts at the board as we can. And it continued for so long with people like Kesha or Ellie Goulding, where it's just like, how many pop hits can we make? And then just hope maybe 2 or 3 of these actually really pop off. So I think it was the same thing for this record. And that's not to say that artistically the artist isn't doing their best to have something that they may think that has a similar narrative, but there is an agenda from a label's perspective to have some sort of formula so that they can have a hit and make their money back off of these records. Right.
And that was also at a time where, like I said, Pandora was taken off, and then eventually that was going to, here we are years later, and streaming is everything. So it was, the digital age was fast approaching music. Right. And you had that whole thing with like Metallica and Napster, and now here we are. And so it's like, it's even crazier these days, you know, where they have to make a return on investment. So you do get a lot of those tapes these days. And it's not until the last couple of years, you know, where I've been so deep in music production and you kind of understand how the game works with like mainstream, like record label type music and then indie music and the gap between and everything in between, and how a lot of it at that end of the spectrum is, hey, we have to turn a profit, you know, as opposed to on the other side where it's like, hey, I'm going to do this.
One thing I think, though, about the digital age and its effect on music is that it has democratized music a lot more, whereas, you know, it's a lot easier for an indie artist to become mainstream because if they release an album and people like it, everybody has access to it because, you know, everybody who even listens to music or who's interested in music has some kind of way to listen to it, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's on any of the streaming platforms. So I think that one of the good things that we did gain from being able to kind of leveling the playing field for artists is that really anyone does have a shot at it, you know, and it doesn't have to be curated by the industry.
I would argue, though, that while that's true, it also got rid of the need from a label perspective to develop any sort of artist. So the prerequisite now is that you already have a following or an interest so that the label can say they've already got their following, they've already got their fans. Now all we need to do is provide that money to get them more exposure, right? Whereas historically what they would do is we had Dean on, right, of Early Internet, who joined the other day to say they heard them at a bar, loved what they sounded like, didn't even know if they had a following, and said, we want to sign you because we think you could be something special, right? So those stories that you hear historically now of like the overnight sensation, because they were an overnight sensation because a label believed in them and put in some sort of development, now that's no longer the case. A record label doesn't want to touch you unless they see you have hundreds of thousands of followers
unless
already.
You're going to turn a profit, right?
Right, unless it's easy money. And what's interesting about record labels in general now is if that's the sign that you've made it in some sort of capacity, then what you're really gaining from that is just financial backing for exposure, because they were gatekeepers for historically is distribution. And this is where I agree with you, Daniel, that it did democratize in the sense that there's no longer a gatekeeper for distribution. You can upload your own record and have people have the ability to listen to it tomorrow. But now what the labels do is they pay for Spotify to put you in their New Music Friday, or they have the connections to get you the exposure, where even though you're on Spotify, doesn't mean it's easy to get in front of ears to listen to it. So it's kind of interesting because, yes, it does make it easier, but it also makes it incrementally harder to get past the point of you can release on your own and do stuff on your own, because there's now so many other barriers to be able to get your sounds in front of ears.
Another aspect of this is that I think music fans are maybe a lot more willing to listen to music that's maybe not just the hits. Like, I think now people listen to everything. And I mean, I'm sure you can relate that growing up a music fan, growing up a music nerd, you did listen to everything, but I don't think a lot of people did. Whereas the younger generation now, they're listening to everything because they have access to it. They don't have to buy a whole CD every time, or even have to purchase the music at all outside of their subscription service that they use. So everybody's listening to everything. Average music fan is probably a lot more open to listening to something that is not the standard pop
top 40 type stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether that's in any genre, because, you know, every genre has their own top 40 really.
Right.
But yeah, I think music fans are a lot more open-minded now.
Yeah. I like I said, for me, it was like those early days of Pandora. That's how I discovered all these different acts. You know, it would play I'd have My Chemical Romance radio, and then all of a sudden they're playing like Jimmy Eat World
And that's really what playlisting has become. You know, you have
True.
mood-based playlists and things like that. So I remember my first one that I listened to there was an app called Songza, and they were basically the first ones who did mood-based stuff. So there was always like Pandora that was like based on existing artists, but Songs, it was the first one that was like, you want Sunday chill? And then you put on that radio and it would just go on.
Wow.
And like, I just remember like listening to that stuff all the time. Like, what is it? I'm getting ready in the morning. Let me choose this getting ready in the morning list or radio station, you know?
Wow.
And it was based on moments and vibes as opposed to Rush radio or Death Cab for Cutie radio, you know, that type of stuff. So, but yeah, Pandora was huge for so many people as well.
Yeah.
So, I do, you know, have a lot of curiosity about, as much as we've been talking about your love for the music industry and kind of your love for music in general, curious about how you kind of got into production. And you have two specific producers here. And I kind of want to start with Mr. Rick Rubin. So why did you list Rick Rubin, and kind of what was your exposure to him and why was he impactful for you?
Man, the living legend. What I can probably say about Rick Rubin is what a lot of people can probably say is you don't know. Like back in the day, I didn't know I was listening to like a Rick Rubin produced record, you know, with acts like the Beastie Boys or Run DMC, you know, when I was getting into them, or gosh, like System of a Down, or he did some Slayer records, you know what I mean? Red Hot Chili Peppers. He's done so many, I could go on and on. But just recently, I'd say in the last couple of years is when I really got on to Rick and his work and who he is as a person, just because he just interests me, you know, working with all of these big historic acts. He's like the Michael Jordan of it for me. It's like, how do you get to that level? You know, I want to do that. I want to be working with Kanye one week, and then the next week I'm in there with Ed Sheeran, or you know what I mean? Like, it's something to aspire to. And there's a lot of videos and source material out about Rick and his career, you know, when he was running Def Jam and in his college dorm room, you know, back in, the 80s or whenever it was, and watching his story about how he started all of that and how it got to the point where he's at now. And I want to say it's Radio 1 or Apple or the BBC. Somebody did a piece with him where they brought in, like, he sat down with like Kendrick, sat with Pharrell, other great producers and artists that I like today. They're all sitting here talking to Rick, and they're happy to be sitting there with him. And so that's like what interests me, you know, in the man. And you find out he's this calm, quiet guy. I kind of got into meditation because of Rick, and something that amazes me that he's talked about when he's with an artist, you know, something that he said is like, what would the best like Daniel record be? You know, what is that going to sound like? Let's make that. And that's something that I try to take into my sessions when I'm working with an artist, is whether we have, you know, specific music, whether it's music of mine or something else with them, what's the best thing that we can make? You know, I always like that approach. And so Rick for me is like the goal, you know what I mean?
I think he's, you know, first of all, incredible and has just so many remarkable credits. There are so many of them where he has been heavily involved from a like music production, like building the track type of perspective. I mean, when he first started, he loved clipping and sampling and creating things with like the Beastie Boys records initially, you know, but later then became just that producer who helps guide the track and is doing less actual physical production and stuff like that. So for example, when we talked to another guest, they kind of talked about them being on the more of the advice driven side versus like beat production. And I know you've done a little bit of both. Do you have a particular preference in terms of either?
Yes, but that's only come like recently. Because for the last couple years I'd been doing both so much. And now that I've kind of gotten established in like what I like to do, I definitely like the executive producer type role, where it's, hey, whether it's some other music that we're bringing in or we have to make it, you know, together with the artist in the session, that's what I'd rather be. More of like a hands off. I don't typically track sessions. I like to work with an engineer, and not to say that I won't. Like I had my recording session yesterday and I was tracking that, but yeah, no, I like the guiding aspect of production. Yeah. These days when I get in the studio with somebody, I like to step back just a bit.
Yeah. From a production standpoint, Rick Rubin's also been like really known for not being overproduced, you know, being really stripped back and really having clear vocals for the most part, right? And I think having really minimal, again, not just overproduced records, which I think is something that's important, and has been praised by so many artists. What are some ideal Rick Rubin records that you would necessarily listen to and call as some of his greatest works?
I mean, when it comes to me and my preferences, like I love Toxicity. You know, do you know he did Volume 3, Slipknot? He did Minutes to Midnight. I thought that record was incredible. I like Linkin Park. I mean, Yeezus is kind of, I love Kanye. So when they got their thing, and I think he did Pablo too. He did, I don't know.
Pablo, he did.
I don't know his like exact
involvement.
Right. You know, a lot of the times with producers, you never do because it's such a broad term and we wear so many different hats, you know, when it comes to production. So.
And sometimes it's almost like consultant depending on.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's like I didn't play a note.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting both from an artist perspective and maybe the outside perspective, what the expectation of the producer is, because I know he's also received criticism for that as well. You know, for example, you know, Muse, I think had something to say about him where they were just like, basically, we'd like to thank Rick Rubin because he taught us exactly how not to produce a record.
Wow,
And
they said that.
Corey Taylor of Slipknot.
I heard Corey Taylor and him had problems.
Same thing too, where it was just like, we paid him all this money and he didn't do shit, you know?
Wow.
Now, again, that could be expectations, right? If they expected him to build tracks and do this stuff and Rick Rubin was like, I'm not doing that, then maybe there is a perception of like, this guy was lazy, right? But it might have just been poor expectations set at the onset, you know? But really impossible to know because maybe he was lazy and didn't fucking help on those records because he's working on 25 other records at the same time or whatever, you know?
Sure.
So I wasn't there. This isn't to judge Rick Rubin or any of that stuff, but I do think it's interesting in terms of what are the expectations of anyone you're bringing into the music room, right? Because how heavily involved do you want them to be? And I'm sure even from a producer's perspective, it's hard to know what the artist is looking for as well,
100%.
because you don't want to overstep and then they're like, hold up. This is our stuff. We just need you to add a couple of little embellishments and things like that.
Right.
So really, really tough. And I think the job itself is kind of difficult. I really love, and it was kind of accentuated because I had a new love for the Beastie Boys after their documentary on Apple TV came out last year, and his involvement. And, you know, License to Ill was that first record that they have, and it still kills now.
So good.
They had a falling out with Def Jam and the stuff that was happening at that time. And I wish like the rest of their career could have been with him because I think they had such a good special,
right,
you know, team for that first record. And yeah.
One thing I love about Rick Rubin, or I guess just the legacy of Rick Rubin is like, especially in the rock world, is like, that's how you know your band made it.
Right.
Like that's the record where they made it and they're on top of the world is the one where they're being produced by Rick Rubin.
And see, and to counter that, like the Corey Taylor and the Muse things, I've heard of a ton of artists, you know, like Serge Tankian and System of a Down talk about how great Rick was to work with and how he impacted them and everything. And I, at least in my world with being a producer, I would have that exact same resume almost, where I've had artists that have like, that still fuck with me today, you know, that are like, yeah, Dom could do it, you know, he's cool. And there's other artists that are like, nah, it wasn't for me, you know. And it's just, yeah, part of it's expectations, part of it's not knowing limits. And, you know, that came with being younger and not knowing really how any of this works, you know, especially at the level I do it at. And so getting to where I'm at today was just one of those things where it's like, like we were talking about earlier, where the only way to get to this point is to just do it. And so like, you gotta get these artists in, you gotta have the sessions, good, bad, you know. There's some sessions I would have where we would crank out 2 or 3 tunes in a session, you know, and there's sessions I've had where nothing gets done and we just sit there and we talk for however long, you know. And those sessions, even though they might not be as productive musically, they're still productive in a way of just learning, you know, or developing a relationship with somebody, you know. I'm really big on just being open and honest with people and seeing how people are feeling, and especially an artist, see where their head's at before we get into something, because if they're feeling a certain way, I don't want to have this agenda where I'm like, okay, well, I know your dog just died and you're going through a breakup, but hey, we got to crank out this happy pop tune, so let's get with it. Yeah, so I always, when I'm in a session or when I'm going to meet some new artist, I like to get a little insight, see where they're at.
That made me think of something that I realized I'd never fully thought of before, about how, some artists we know have publicly criticized their sessions with Rick Rubin,
Mm-hmm.
and yet working with Rick Rubin is still regarded as a turning point in someone's career, or they've reached a certain level of it's a status symbol,
Right.
in a way. This conversation has made me think about how there are times where at the end of the day, these are still human beings making music, and they're not always going to get along. Even if the record label's telling you need to go work with Rick Rubin, because that's where we're taking this band next. Like Slipknot, I think, for instance, there was probably a lot of label pressure for them to go and work with Rick Rubin, because that was just what you did when you got to that level.
That was the guy. Yeah.
But then because people are people, it just didn't work out the way that it does for other bands. So it's maybe something that I've intuitively realized, like, hey, maybe like not everyone's going to get along, but the industry is going to still pressure you to have that credential just for the optics, really.
Right. And I mean, right now where I'm at, I'm not in a position where I'm getting pressured from any outside sources as to who to work with, what to make, what's going to fit where. I don't have to worry about returning anybody else's investments, and so it's really liberating where I'm at right now. Maybe even if label work is in the future, there's a benefit to where I'm sitting at right now.
Yeah.
It's just a learning experience. It's been great. And Rick Rubin, like seeing how he's talked about working through highs and lows with artists, and just how he's so, every time I've seen him being interviewed or doing a thing with an artist or whatever, he's a good listener, and that's what I strive to be, is a better listener. Cause we've been boys for a little while, I've historically like to talk, and I just hit a point, where it was personal, it was music, it was personal, it was business, where I was like, I don't want to talk as much as I do, I want to stop, I want to listen, I want to take more time to enjoy where I'm at, enjoy the life I live, the opportunities that I get, and I'll tie this back into like when I heard the Rise Against record, when that opens your eyes to what's going on in all these different parts of the world, I could be some little kid somewhere where there's a military takeover and it's not safe to go outside. But here I am, I get to make music, I get to come be on a podcast in Los Angeles, so I don't want to take any of that for granted. I don't want to rush. And I feel like the thing with music and consumption these days is it's always what's next. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And a lot of people, at least from what I've learned, have a hard time stopping and smelling the roses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an awesome outlook that you're able to kind of have that at the moment. Okay, Dom, I don't want to keep you for too much longer. I know you got places to be, things to do, but, this next thing, and we'll stay in the music vein, is OVO. You're also one of the only people I know with an OVO tattoo.
Man, you didn't have to bring that up.
Exposed.
Yeah, no, I got it at the Zone.
You don't gotta explain the tattoo, but tell me about your love for OVO.
And I love it so much I got a tattoo.
Yeah, man. So what was it about him?
So
and explain what OVO is for the audience who may not know.
So OVO stands for October's Very Own, which is, I don't know, it's like a collective, I guess, at this point. It's kind of like its own business, what it's become. But it's like Drake. It's him and his group of guys, his producers, his manager, his homies, the owl that you see on all his branding. That's the OVO. How I got into that was 7th grade. I met my really good friend, Nate. And Nate's he's the biggest hip hop head I know.
Yeah.
That's all he listens to. I mean, not all he listens to, but majority of the time, he's always on the new hip hop, all the new trap, rap, you know. And so when we met in middle school, I was still listening to all that rock music, all the metal and all that. And he put me on to, I think at the time it was So Far Gone.
Yeah.
And man, listening to, and it like So Far Gone, like you go back now and you're like, all right, it's cool. But all the other stuff he's done since is, you know, miles and miles better. But
Yeah.
at the time, nobody else was like really singing and rapping the way that he was doing it. You know, you had your R&B singers, you know, you had like
Kid Cudi, bro.
yeah, I guess. Yeah. But he was the guy that kind of like, he was talking about, you know, romancing women and still trying to be like accepted in rap. And
Yeah.
I have a big appreciation for lyricism. And at the time, Drake would have these not intricate verses, but he'd say some slick shit and you'd be like, oh yeah, that's tight. And it'd be the beat behind it. And, you know, you go back years later and you learn that So Far Gone was the first record that 40 kind of took over a little bit of the production, gave it that underwater sound with the big, you know, the drums. And seeing how that's evolved has definitely like affected how I make music.
Yeah.
You know?
In a recent episode, the one we actually just put out, Daniel and I got together to kind of talk through like some Q&As and stuff like that we had. And one thing that came up was More Life by Drake, you know. I don't even remember how it came up anymore, but, you know, I also look back fondly at this time because it's something that I think was also, More Life came out around the time that you and I met and kind of became friends, you know. And so a lot of our initial conversations were about that record and about Drake in general, probably because of the tattoo and stuff like that too, right? And the fact that like I knew you were such a Drake fan that you kind of like also like showed me a lot of these things about Drake and other Drake records that maybe I wasn't necessarily hip to and stuff. And so I also think that this is also a big aspect of our friendship and stuff as well is this music. I'm really glad you put it down because we were kind of able to really connect with this type of stuff.
Right. That's his thing, man, especially now. Now it's like a machine. Like the way that he works is so precise. It's so technical. You know, he's got all the best producers and beat makers throwing in music. You know, he's got a great team of writers and he can work, you know, with the amount of money he can work with anybody else, you know. He doesn't need Rick Rubin. He's past that point.
Yeah.
And to just see his progression as an artist, seeing how he kind of climbed that mountain still comes correct every time. You know, like people wait on Drake records and it's crazy.
Yeah, I think he has changed, maybe not single-handedly, but the demographic of rap is different. I mean, it definitely happened over time with people that, of course, he was affiliated with, like Lil Wayne, you know, having huge records in the 2000s that made people interested.
Right.
I think the more general music audience was then ready to listen to a rap album or a Drake album or whatever it may be. I love Drake. It's almost like it's almost like a guilty pleasure.
It's like, how can you not? He's kind of like the LeBron of music, where like people are like, nah, he's not that great, and everybody's like, nah.
But everybody's watching him. You know what I'm saying? Like it's similar to LeBron. Like you love him, you hate him, you watch him because that's what's going on in that field, whatever it may be.
And I think modern day hip hop is a lot like how you said, if a band gets produced by Rick Rubin, it's like, yo, if you get a Drake feature, that's when you know that like
exactly
you're doing it. You know.
Yeah, I mean, he was and is in some ways still the biggest artist, up there with the, you know, Taylor Swifts of the world, or anyone who's put it, anytime Drake puts out a record, like it's going number one almost every time, just because of the cultural interest in it. You know, I remember when Nice for What and God's Plan dropped, like it was just like instant hits, man.
And I think the biggest thing about it is when you're in the industry, in a sense of like you make music, you understand how hard it is to have a number one song. You know, you understand everything that goes into it at that level. And the fact that they do it every single time. When you just, like over the pandemic, when him and Dirk dropped that Laugh Now, Cry Later, you know, it was everywhere.
I think it's easier at that point though, because like you become in the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
You are now in the zeitgeist, and so everyone's looking forward to what you're going to do next, right? It's why the second Lorde throws up an album cover, everyone loses their mind, because she had royals back in the day, right? And people respect her. Same thing with Taylor. I think we see it now. We're probably going to see it with Olivia Rodrigo the next time she has a release, right? The big pop artists, kind of once you hit a certain level, people are going to have an interest. That does die eventually, right? Because I mean, Katy Perry, when she puts out a record, isn't going up to the top, but everyone kind of has their moments. But I think people in that sphere now are Post Malone. Almost anytime he drops anything, it goes to the top in some ways, right? Cardi B, we start to see that stuff, you know. So, but Drake has been consistent for a long time now.
Yeah, and like Daniel said, it's some people won't know, but like without Lil Wayne, there's no. And Drake will say it. There's no him without like Lil Wayne and Young Money and what they were able to do at that time. And
I think that's true for a lot of artists, you know. You know, everyone has their influences and like people who helped pave the way and open opportunities for them to be able to do their art.
Right.
Cudi, who we reference, would say the same about Kanye. Most hip hop artists would say the same about Kanye.
Everybody's saying it about Kanye, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of one of those things where there are certain people who have kind of opened up doors and created opportunities for people in the industry.
Yeah, and the big thing about Drake is not only like his star appeal and you know his raps and everything. A big thing for me is that music, you know, because he's got some of the best music that I've ever heard. Yeah, you know, in terms of like the samples they cut, the way they do drums, the way that he sits on top of melodies. Sometimes it's beautiful.
I gotta ask, and I think I know the answer to this question, but I don't remember. But did you ever watch Mr. Aubrey Graham on Degrassi?
No.
Did you even know his name was Aubrey Graham?
I wasn't on Degrassi. No, I was.
Dang.
That was one of those things where everybody's like, is that guy from Degrassi? I was like, I don't know. That's that guy that makes this hip hop record.
Dang, bro.
Yeah.
Respect for Jimmy Brooks, man. That was his kid.
Yeah, no, by all means.
Cool. Well, I do have a question before we move on to your last one here. And that is, what would you say are your top 3 OVO Drake records?
I'm going to catch some heat for this. Any specific order?
Any specific order, that's fine.
Nothing Was the Same.
Okay.
Take Care, if you're reading this.
Okay. Dang, no love for... Well, you know what's interesting about Drake, though, too, is he was, like, very adamant about, like, what he considers a studio album and what he considers, like, a mixtape and stuff. And, like, it bothers me a little just because my favorite Drake project is More Life, which we talked about. Which he calls a mixtape, but at the time, he's since like kind of gone back and forth on it. But at the time, he was like, I kind of view this as like a playlist, you know? And he was referring to it as that. And I'm like, bro, it's an album, man. It's just like...
It's so, like, it's a long
Because even, I think it's the same for even If You're Reading This.
Yeah, that's considered a mixtape. But like, it's so...
commercial album.
Right, it's so perfect from a production standpoint and like the sonics of all of it. Yeah, it's completely mastered and everything. So it's...
And it's hard to not even consider anything at his stature that comes out that is more than 10 songs to not be considered an album, you know? So...
Yeah, I mean, that's like a whole thing with like hip hop culture and mixtapes, and that's a whole nother conversation. But like to me, mixtape means like maybe there's something on there that's not like mastered as well as it could be.
Yeah, and I think technically the only records he considers studio albums are Thank Me Later, Take Care, Nothing Was the Same, Views, and Scorpion.
Oh, I forgot all about Views, bro.
Yeah.
Views might be number 3.
Yeah. Views had some joints.
Yeah.
Oh, so good.
All right, y'all. Well, let's go ahead and get on to your last one here. That's Mr. Anthony Bourdain. Tell me about your love for this man and kind of why he was impactful for you.
Anthony Bourdain is one of my favorite humans to have ever existed. It's his personality, man. Like just watching him on TV for all those years, and he's who got me into like wanting to travel and try all this food. But like the thing that really caught me about Anthony is he was just sitting there with everyday people. Yeah. You know, he wasn't going to like these 5-star restaurants all the time and only sitting with exclusive crazy things. Like he did do that. He went to some of the best joints, you know, all over the world. But he would also go to like a little taco shop in wherever, or little hole in the wall in Vietnam, and you got to see so many different parts of the world, and he's delivering this comedic monologue the best way that he could. And
Sure.
I love his sense of humor, and he taught me to just kind of along the same lines, man, to just enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
To not take all of it too serious. We're all going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows what the answer is to any of this. So it's like, eat some good food. Don't be a dick, and
Yeah.
try to keep it pushing.
Yeah, man. How did you come across him? Was it No Reservations or Parts Unknown, or what show did you kind of catch on?
I think I caught it first on No Reservations, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually I ran through all of those. I ran through all of Parts Unknown, and
So it was live, or you kind of caught him later?
later,
Mm,
for sure. Yeah.
dang. I remember you being pretty hurt, when he passed.
Man.
For good reason. I'm not saying you
Yeah.
shouldn't have been, but yeah, I mean, it was kind of a bummer because I didn't really experience any of his work at that point, and
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of like, oh, really, Dom? Was really shook up by this. I didn't even know you had a love for this man. But
Yeah.
when you kind of lay it out like that and kind of highlight his, man, just enjoy life while you're here. One is like inspiring to kind of hear that, but also like takes a whole new level with the fact that he kind of passed the way he did. Because
Right.
I'd like to believe he did live by that same mantra,
Sure.
and his travels, while they may have been stressful and it was clear he was kind of dealing with his own demons,
Mm-hmm.
I hope, that he was kind of able to do all of that, right?
Right,
To
and it's-
appreciate life for what it was.
It's one of those situations where, in when someone of that status,
Mm-hmm.
you hear that it's a suicide, and without getting too far away from it, there's the controversy of the specifics of his death, but going on the narrative that's a suicide, and then you hear all the stuff that was coming out after, how he was dealing with like these relationship problems, and going through the same stuff that a lot of us
Mm-hmm.
go through, and to see the path that he took, it's a blessing and a curse, because you see it from your life and you're like, well, shit, man, I don't want to try to go what he went through, if it leads to that,
Mm-hmm.
so I got to be careful how I'm doing my thing with people around me and trying to put the best people I can, whether it's a friendship, a relationship, a business relationship, a professional thing, just to always try to be in a better state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things these days, if it's negative or it's bringing me stress or whatever the case is, I try to like get it out of my life.
Yeah.
Like as quickly as possible. And it's a different thing, with like stuff like grief or,
Mm-hmm.
if a relationship goes sour or whatever it is, I still believe in feeling every emotion as it happens. I think life demands to be felt, and that's something that you shouldn't hide from.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm always a big advocate for, I think you're always going to be able to push through, and when you see something like that to where somebody doesn't push through,
Yeah.
it gives you a level of appreciation for the life that you have.
Mm.
And that's like the constant theme with kind of what I picked, how it's shaped my view on things. It's helped me appreciate life, because being in the industry I'm in, it's a creative industry. It's because of the love of the arts, but beyond all that, before I'm a music producer or an artist, a musician, whatever it is, I'm a human being first. I have my relationships with my people, my family, and that's going to mean more to me than anything that I'll ever do with music. To me, that's what it's all about, is the relationships you make and the memories you make along the way. And Anthony kind of helped develop that view for me, is, hey, this is what it is. This is what you should appreciate.
Wow. And that's a beautiful way, I think, to kind of close things off. So before we let you go, though, we do have 5 rapid fire questions that we ask here. Okay, sir. So first things first, if you could choose a reality TV show, which one would you choose?
And Naked and Afraid.
Naked and Afraid?
Yeah.
All right, dope.
Because I'm afraid of being naked.
If people have never consumed any of your Pop 5, what is the one that you'd want them to go experience right now? Guitar Hero 2, baby.
Guitar Hero 2, yeah. No, I would say watch some episodes of Anthony Bourdain's stuff, like some No Reservations. If you're a big music fan, give the Rise Against record a spin, because I think there's something in there for everybody.
Yeah.
Drake's one of those things, man, where it's like I can't really put anybody onto Drake in 2021. If you're not on Drake now, you've missed the boat. You're late.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
If you're listening to this, it's too late.
Yeah, if you're hearing this, it's too late, man, for sure.
Oh, man. Okay, who is an artist that you would love to work with?
Oh, wow. There's so many.
Name one.
Khalid.
Okay. Yeah. For any of your existing tracks, if you can have someone perform over that track, who would you want to come perform on that track?
Besides Drake.
Well, you could say Drake.
Kendrick Lamar.
Okay.
No. To be fair to me and to be fair to Kendrick, I don't have any music that Kendrick could hop on.
Okay.
Maybe The Weeknd.
I
think that could earn me a number one. Maybe some money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, last one here, bud. What are 5 words that you would tell a past version of yourself?
Don't be such a bitch. No, and I say that, and I feel like anybody can kind of look back, because so much of what held me back in the day was fear of rejection, just general nerves, anxiety. And the thing is, like, those opportunities are going to come and go. The only thing you can do is act on them. Mm-hmm. Life only changes if you take action. Yeah. Don't be such a bitch.
Okay. All right. Is there anything you'd like to promote?
Man, I'm currently right now working on it's not a secret project, but I'm not really ready to give the details. So here in the next couple months, I'll have something coming out. I don't know, man. I really, if anybody wants to hire a producer, I'm always looking for new people to work with. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter at DomSean. That's SHWN at the end. Yeah, I have a link that people can go to. You can hire me for mixing work. You can hire me for a producer. I have music out on Apple, Spotify.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put it in the episode description, and
hell yeah.
We'll have a tune for when we come in and a tune of yours for when we go out. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I love you, buddy. You're one of my closest friends.
This was great.
I'm so thankful to have you in my life. And man, it was
feelings
fun.
Mutual. All both right. You guys, for sure. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, bud. We love you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. That'll do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. Today we're sending you out with a tune. I hope you love it. Please follow us on Instagram and Twitter at MyPop5. And as always, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next week. And until then, what's your Pop 5?